Imagine buying a forgotten lodge for a mere $100, only to discover it's not empty, but alive with a century of untold secrets. What if that bargain wasn't a curse, but a call to uncover a legacy that could change your soul forever? Subscribe to find out what happens next, and witness a truth buried for generations. Before we dive into a story that changed everything for me, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this journey of healing and uncovering forgotten truths touches your heart, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us share more stories like mine, stories of hope found in the most unexpected places. I remember the day it all began, deep in the ancient embrace of West Virginia's wilderness. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a familiar balm to a soul as scarred as mine. For years, I, Alex, a U.S. park ranger and a veteran haunted by shadows I couldn't outrun, had sought refuge in these mountains. My only constant companion was Koda, my loyal German shepherd, a sentinel of courage and an anchor to the present. He was more than a dog. He was family, a silent witness to the battles I still fought inside. It was a desolate, forgotten place known only as Harrow's Ridge Lodge. Locals whispered tales of vanishing families and a lingering curse, a property so steeped in sorrow that no one dared claim it. I, broken in ways the visible world couldn't comprehend, laid my last meager savings on the deed. It was a gamble, not for glory, but for a semblance of peace, a quiet corner where Koda and I could simply exist. When I first stepped through the threshold, Koda at my side, it wasn't emptiness that greeted us. It was a silence that hummed with untold stories, a tangible weight in the stale air. Koda's ears twitched, his golden eyes, ever watchful, burned with an intensity I recognized, a guardian sensing a truth buried for a century. From that moment, I knew my gamble wasn't just about a derelict lodge. It was about a legacy that would change my soul forever. I was 35, though the years of service in Afghanistan and the quiet battles I waged within myself had etched lines far beyond my age. My body, once a soldier's instrument, now moved with the fluid strength of a park ranger, lean and conditioned by endless patrols across these rugged mountains. The scars I carried were both visible, faded lines from shrapnel, and those unseen, the ones that whispered in the quiet hours. My dark brown hair was kept short, a neat beard framing a jaw that had known its share of grit and fatigue. My deep green eyes, they held that faraway gaze, the one soldiers often never lose, a window into a past that clung to me like the mountain mist. Before Harrow's Ridge, Koda and I lived in a cramped, isolated cabin provided by the Park Service, a place that felt more like a temporary shelter than a home. The walls often creaked with the wind, the old wood stove struggling against the brutal mountain winters, its warmth never quite reaching the deepest parts of me. My mind often drifted back to Sarah, a woman who had once brought a vivid warmth into my life, a laughter that echoed through every corner of my being. But the war had taken its toll, leaving a chasm I couldn't bridge. She had left me 3 years ago, her gentle words carrying the weight of an unavoidable truth. I can't build a future with a man who lives in the past. I hadn't stopped her. How could I, when the very ground beneath my feet felt like shifting sand? A man who couldn't find peace for himself, I believed, wasn't worthy of anchoring another's happiness. That raw truth, a wound always reopening, gnawed at me on countless lonely nights, Koda often pressing his head against my leg as if sensing the unspoken pain. My only true companions were Koda and the ghost of my past, memories of brothers in arms who hadn't come home. I still carried my ranger knife, a heavy, reliable tool, but also a talisman. It wasn't just the blade, it was the weight, the cold steel in my hand, a grounding reminder of the man I once was, the man I was trying to rediscover. I'd often find myself gripping it, the silence broken only by Koda's soft breathing, a silent conversation with the pieces of myself that felt lost. One raw evening, after a long day of patrolling the outer reaches of the park, I sat hunched over my battered government-issued laptop. Koda lay stretched out beside me, his head on my boot, occasionally letting out a puffed sigh. I was meant to be filing reports, documenting trail conditions and wildlife sightings, but my gaze drifted, caught by a local online auction for distressed properties. It was a habit, I suppose, born of a quiet desperation to find something, anything, that felt solid. A headline, almost an afterthought amidst the usual listings for old farm equipment and salvaged timber, snagged my attention. Historic Lodge, Remote mountain tract, rare opportunity. Curiosity, a faint flicker in the dim landscape of my emotions, sharpened. I clicked. The images that loaded were grainy, almost reluctant to fully reveal themselves. It was an old hunting lodge, nestled deep within a forgotten valley, its once proud facade now a skeletal frame of weathered wood, windows boarded haphazardly, vines clawing at its stone foundation like desperate hands. Harrow's Ridge Lodge. The description was curt, almost dismissive. Built 1898, structurally compromised, significant land parcel, sold as is, starting bid 100. My chair groaned as I leaned back, a small, mirthless laugh escaping me. $100. It was absurd. Even in these parts, a shed commanded more. There had to be a catch, a reason no one wanted it. Perhaps the foundation was crumbling into the mountain itself, or maybe the old legends of it being cursed. A place that held on to its secrets too fiercely were true. My ranger's mind, still steeped in the soldier's logic of risk assessment, cataloged every potential pitfall. But then, a deeper, quieter part of me stirred, a voice that rarely spoke above the din of my internal battles. What if this was my chance? I closed my eyes, picturing it, real space, air that tasted purely of pine and rain, not the stale exhaust of forgotten memories. A place where silence wasn't just the absence of noise, but a profound, healing peace. I imagined Sarah, her bright smile, the way she used to light up a room. It was a dream long faded, I knew, but the longing for belonging, for a place to truly set roots, remained. My gaze returned to the screen, my pulse settling into that familiar, measured rhythm I knew from combat, the calm before a decisive action. Sarah's words, the ones that had cleaved my life in two, echoed softly. You need a home, Alex, a real one. A grim resolve tightened my jaw. Perhaps it was too late for her and me, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late for me to build that home for myself, for Koda. My finger hovered over the bid button. What do you think, old friend? I murmured to Koda, running my fingers through his thick fur. He nudged my hand, a silent affirmation. I brushed my other hand against the ranger knife at my belt, its familiar weight a comfort. In the back of my mind, I could almost hear the ghosts of fallen comrades, their silent encouragement urging me forward. I clicked. The bid registered, a sudden constriction in my chest. Minutes stretched into an eternity as I watched the numbers on the screen. They flickered, rose slightly, then faltered, and finally stopped. Congratulations! You are the winning bidder. I exhaled, a slow, deliberate release of breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. I had just bought Harrow's Ridge Lodge, if you could still call it that, for $100. The absurdity of it was almost liberating. The next morning, Koda was waiting patiently by the truck as I drove to the county seat to finalize the paperwork. The office was small, smelling of old paper and lukewarm coffee. The clerk, an older man named Silas Croft, wore thick-rimmed glasses perched on his nose and a tweed jacket that had seen better decades. His voice was a flat monotone, clearly having recited these same caveats countless times. You understand, Ranger, Silas said, sliding the deed across the scuffed desk. All sales are final. The lodge and the land are yours. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you, there's a reason it went for so little. His pale eyes, weary but perceptive, lingered on me, a mixture of pity and something like warning. What reason? I asked, my voice steady, though a flicker of unease stirred within me. Silas shrugged, his shoulders hunching as if under an invisible weight. Some folks call it cursed. Families move in, they never stay. Others say it just remembers too much, or the mountain holds its own secrets. Either way, no one wants it. Until now. I took the pen, my signature a bold, determined scratch across the page, a silent vow to myself and to the broken structure awaiting me. Then I'll take it, I simply said. Silas leaned back, studying me for a long moment. You're a veteran, aren't you? K-9 unit, I heard. I nodded once, a brief acknowledgement of a past I rarely discussed. Then maybe you've got the grit it takes, he muttered, his gaze drifting towards the window, where the endless peaks of the Alleghenies stood shrouded in mist. Lord knows no one else has lasted there. As I stepped out, Koda met me with a soft whine and a wag of his tail, sensing the shift in my demeanor. The sky over the small town was a bruised gray, heavy with the promise of more winter rain. I tucked the deed into my worn ranger jacket, feeling its weight against my chest. I harbored no illusions. A $100 lodge, especially one with such a reputation, wasn't a bargain. It was a burden, a challenge waiting to reveal its true cost. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, something stirred inside me that wasn't bitterness or the deep-seated exhaustion I carried. It was possibility, a tentative seed of hope pushing through the cracked earth of my soul. I looked towards the distant mountains, towards Harrow's Ridge Lodge, shrouded in its own silence, waiting for me. I didn't believe in curses, not in the way the locals did. I believed in scars and wounds that never truly healed, only learned to exist. And maybe this lodge, like me, was nothing more than broken walls trying to stand again, yearning for a purpose beyond its decay. "All right, old friend," I murmured to Koda, my hand finding the soft fur behind his ears. "Let's see what you've got for us." And so, with nothing more than my ranger knife, the echoes of my past, Koda by my side, and a deed worth less than a month's groceries, I set out to meet the lodge that had chosen me as much as I had chosen it. The road to Harrow's Ridge was less a path and more a suggestion, carved into the side of the mountain decades ago, now barely clinging to the land. Ancient oaks and gnarled hemlocks, their branches heavy with a sudden, early snowfall, reached out like skeletal fingers. I navigated my battered Park Service pickup slowly, the engine straining as we climbed. Koda, usually alert and keen-eyed in the passenger seat, seemed unusually restless, a low rumble occasionally vibrating in his chest. "Easy, boy," I murmured, my hand resting on his head. He was more than just a dog. He was my early warning system, a finely tuned instrument of detection. And something was definitely off. The lodge itself appeared through a sudden break in the swirling snow, a gaunt silhouette against the bruised sky, its dark windows like vacant eyes. It was even more desolate than the auction photos had suggested. But before I could even pull into the winding, overgrown driveway, Koda tensed, a guttural growl escaping him. His ears pinned back, hackles raised. He pointed his nose toward a dense thicket of pines on the ridge overlooking the lodge, a place that wasn't part of my newly acquired property, but bordered it. "What is it, Koda?" I grabbed my binoculars, sweeping the ridge. The snow was falling heavier now, painting the forest in stark whites and grays. I saw nothing, but Koda was insistent, pulling hard on his leash, a low, urgent bark escaping him. He was trained for this, to detect intruders, to sense anomalies. This wasn't a deer or a bear, this was something else. I knew better than to ignore him. Parking the truck out of sight, I donned my full winter gear, grabbed my Park Service rifle, an old, reliable bolt-action, and my radio. "Stay close, Koda," I whispered, and we began to ascend the snow-dusted slope toward the ridge. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, whipping snow into stinging clouds. It was becoming a full-blown blizzard. We moved stealthily, Koda's powerful legs crunching softly through the fresh powder. He led the way, nose to the ground, his body language communicating an escalating tension. Suddenly, he froze. A faint scent, a metallic tang beneath the pine, registered with me. And then I heard it, the guttural hum of heavy machinery, muted by the storm but unmistakable. Illegal logging, or worse, mining, on protected land, not far from my new lodge. Koda gave a low, urgent bark, then darted forward, disappearing into the whiteout. "Koda, no!" I yelled, my voice swallowed by the wind. I scrambled after him, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found him near a makeshift camp, half hidden by tarps and snow-covered equipment. There were men there, 2 of them, bundled in heavy gear, their faces obscured. They weren't loggers. Their postures, their gear, it screamed private security, PMC. They were tampering with something, a small device blinking red in the snow. One of them spotted Koda. "Dog!" he yelled, his voice rough. Before I could even raise my rifle, a shot cracked through the storm, impossibly loud. Koda yelped, a sound that tore through me and crumpled into the snow. "Koda!" I screamed, pure unadulterated rage surging through me. I fired a warning shot, aiming high, trying to buy myself time. The 2 men scrambled, grabbing their gear, disappearing back into the blizzard like ghosts. I reached Koda, falling to my knees in the snow. A dark stain bloomed on his side, crimson against the white. He whimpered, his golden eyes looking up at me, filled with pain, but also an unwavering trust. "No, no, Koda. Hang on, buddy." My hands, usually steady, trembled as I fumbled with my medical kit. The blizzard was intensifying, the wind howling, visibility dropping to mere feet. We were alone, vulnerable, and Koda was bleeding. There was no time for revenge, no time to pursue the men. My priority was Koda. I wrapped his wound as best I could, using my coat to shield him from the relentless wind. He nudged my hand, a weak but resolute gesture. I hefted his heavy body, struggling through the deep snow. The lodge, Harrow's Ridge, was now our only refuge. It was no longer just a dilapidated property. It was a sanctuary, a haven from the sudden violence that had erupted around us. With Koda cradled in my arms, his warmth fading, I plunged through the blizzard, my boots sinking deep into the fresh powder, driven by a primal fear and a fierce determination to save him. The chilling wind howled around us, a symphony of trauma and the promise of deeper shadows ahead. I barely remember stumbling through the driving snow, Koda, a heavy, precious weight in my arms. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at my clothes, threatening to rip the warmth from my But adrenaline, stark and cold, pushed me forward. The looming shape of Harrow's Ridge Lodge, its windows dark and vacant, was no longer just a place I'd bought. It was a shelter, a lifeline. The rusted gate groaned open under my desperate push. My truck was still parked haphazardly. I reached the sagging front porch, Koda's whimpers a faint sound against the storm. The old boards groaned under my weight, each creak a protest against our intrusion. My key strangely felt warm in my frozen hand. The lock, stiff with years of neglect, yielded with a long, aching groan, the sound lost in the blizzard's fury. Inside, the air was a heavy, suffocating blanket of stale dust and the bitter scent of decay. Weak, bruised light fought its way through cracks in the boarded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing like phantom flakes in the gloom. The entrance hall was vast, its grand staircase rising into an impenetrable darkness. A chandelier, draped in thick cobwebs, hung like a forgotten skeleton. I laid Koda gently on a thick canvas tarp I'd pulled from my duffel bag, his body trembling, his breathing shallow. His golden eyes, usually so vibrant, were glazed with pain. I worked quickly, my hands still clumsy with cold and fear, cleaning the wound, packing it with sterile gauze, giving him a broad-spectrum antibiotic from my emergency kit. He whimpered softly, leaning into my touch, his trust absolute. "Hang in there, buddy," I whispered, pressing my forehead to his. "You're going to be okay." The blizzard raged outside, rattling the loose panes, making the old lodge groan and creak around us. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sound amplified. My soldier's instincts, usually a comforting hum of alertness, were screaming now, a discordant symphony of threat and uncertainty. I didn't just feel the lodge's age. I felt its unspoken history, a presence that was more than just crumbling wood and stone. As the first crude bandage was applied, Koda's ears twitched, then pricked forward, his low growl a barely audible tremor. His gaze, even in his pain, was fixed on the staircase, piercing the gloom. My own eyes, sharpened by years of scanning for danger, followed his lead. My heavy-duty flashlight, a beacon against the encroaching darkness, cut a beam upwards. And there, in the deepest shadows of the landing, I saw them. Not golden eyes, but something colder, a glint of metal, a flicker of movement. Not a bobcat, not another animal, but the unmistakable outline of a hastily concealed surveillance camera, almost swallowed by the cobwebs. And next to it, tucked into a loose floorboard, a small, dark object. My jaw tightened. This wasn't just an old, forgotten lodge. This was a staging ground, a place being watched, possibly even used. Koda hadn't just stumbled into illegal logging. He'd stumbled onto something far more sinister, something they didn't want anyone to see. The shot that felled him hadn't been an accident. It had been an execution attempt, the object tucked away. It looked like a data chip. "Clever boy," I muttered, reaching for it with a gloved hand, my knife already drawn and ready. The camera, crude but effective, was wired to a small battery pack. They had been watching. Who? And what were they watching for? This wasn't just my property, it was a contested zone. The initial feeling of a curse was fading, replaced by a colder, harder truth. This wasn't a haunt of the past, it was a battleground of the present. Koda, my wounded courier, had just delivered the first piece of evidence. The long night crawled by with Koda trembling beside me, his breath shallow. I kept a fire going in the massive stone hearth in the main hall, its meager warmth battling the lodge's pervasive chill. Every creak of the old timbers, every gust of wind against the boarded windows made me jump, my rifle never far from my grasp. The data chip, secured in a waterproof pouch, felt like a burning ember in my pocket. I knew its contents could reveal the identity of the men who had shot Koda, the nature of their operation, and why they were so desperate to hide it. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about Koda's life, and the larger truth hidden beneath the snow. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the gaps in the boards, painting the dust motes in shifting patterns, Koda stirred. His eyes, though still clouded with pain, held a spark of recognition. He managed a weak lick to my hand. "That's it, buddy," I whispered, relief washing over me, cool and sweet like spring water. "You're a fighter." His resilience, his unwavering spirit, anchored me. In the quiet hours of his recovery, the weight of my own past, the ghosts of forgotten battles, felt a little less suffocating. Here, in this broken lodge, tending to Koda, I was Alex, a ranger, a protector, not just a soldier lost in memory. This wound, Koda's wound, connected us to the present in a way I hadn't felt in years. Later that morning, with Koda resting as comfortably as possible, I began to cautiously explore. The lodge was a labyrinth of echoing rooms, stripped bare of furniture, their wallpaper peeling like old skin. The kitchen reeked of rust and mildew, an ancient iron stove sitting like a forgotten sentinel. It was there, near a warped, half-open pantry door, that Koda, despite his injury, stiffened. He let out a low shit whine, his ears pricked forward, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. "What is it, Koda?" I murmured, my hand instinctively going to my knife. His warning was subtle, but I trusted it. Implicitly. The door led to a narrow stairwell plunging into utter blackness, the air wafting up cool and damp, smelling of earth and something else, something ancient and undisturbed. The basement. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam a solitary spear in the gloom, and descended the groaning stairs. Koda, limping but determined, followed close behind me, his growl a faint, steady thrum against the encroaching shadows. The basement was a crypt of stone and timber, walls slick with moisture. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, brushed my shoulders. The beam swept across broken crates, rusted nails, and shelves buckling under the weight of dust-choked jars. Then Koda, with a burst of surprising energy, darted forward, pressing his nose into a corner behind a toppled shelving unit. I crouched, my light catching on something. The edge of a heavy wooden trunk, iron-banded and scarred. Its surface bore water stains and deep scratches, as though it had fought time and nearly lost. Dust lay so thick it muted the wood's color to gray. I brushed my hand across the lid, stirring a faint cloud. "Been here a long time," I whispered. I tested the latch. It resisted, then gave way with a brittle snap. The hinges groaned, a sound like a tortured breath, and a stale breath of air escaped, carrying the scent of old paper and decay. A smell that was somehow both unsettling and profoundly compelling. Inside lay bundles of yellowed documents, their edges curled and fragile. A few framed photographs rested on top, their glass clouded. I lifted one, wiping the surface with my sleeve. What emerged made my chest tighten, my breath catch in my throat. A family stood before Harrow's Ridge Lodge in its prime, pristine and proud. The man at the center, stern-faced and rigid, wore a dark suit. Beside him, a woman in a long dress, her hair pinned high. Behind them, arranged like shadows, were plainly dressed servants. My eyes caught on one figure, a tall woman in the back row, her shoulders broad, her jaw square. Her eyes were pale, almost silver, the same strange hue I saw every morning in my own reflection. I stared at the photo, the recognition burning deeper than reason. My grip on the frame tightened. Another bundle revealed a leather-bound notebook, its pages inked in neat, looping script. The name inside the cover read, Eliza Harrow. The name jolted me. My grandmother had once whispered stories of her grandmother, a woman named Eliza, who had worked in a grand house in the mountains of West Virginia, a place of secrets. I had always dismissed it as a family legend, more folklore than truth, a story to soothe a child's imagination. Now, here it was, inked in black on fragile paper. I turned pages, notes of wages paid, names of families, lists of work. Then at the margins, shorter, sharper sentences. He does not see us. The land remembers more than the master does. One day, blood will return. I set the notebook down slowly, my pulse hammering. This was not chance. This lodge was not simply a bargain, not just a refuge. It was a thread tugging me back through generations, pulling me into something larger than myself. Koda gave a low growl, snapping me from my thoughts. The dog's gaze fixed on a seam in the stone wall, his fur bristling. I shined my light and noticed it. A thin gap, almost invisible where mortar had crumbled. Something glinted faintly inside. I reached in and tugged free a small envelope, brittle with age, sealed in wax. The front bore words in faded ink. To the one who carries the blood. My hand trembled as I broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet. The ink had thinned, but the words remained, stark and undeniable. If you have found me, then you are kin. Our truth is buried deeper than their lies. They never found the room. You must. The house remembers. It will guide you. Signed, Eliza Harrow. The letter's weight pressed into me, heavier than any weapon I had carried. I sat back on the dusty floor, staring at the words. My grandmother's soft voice whispered in memory, "There was once a woman named Eliza. She never left the house she served." I realized then, with a chilling clarity, this lodge was not just wood and stone. It was a ledger of pain and survival, and my name, Alex, had been written in its margins long before I had stepped across the threshold. The past was not merely history. It was a living entity, demanding justice. I carefully replaced the papers and the notebook in the trunk, but kept the letter. Koda pressed close to my side, his body taut, ears still trained on the wall, as if waiting for something more, a phantom echo from generations past. I laid a hand on the animal's back, steadying myself as much as the dog. "This wasn't chance," I said quietly, the words feeling strange but undeniably true. "We didn't just stumble in, we were called." He whined softly, a low rumble of understanding. I had come here for a cheap roof, a place to hide. Instead, I had uncovered bloodlines, whispers, and a warning that the lodge itself wasn't done telling its story. I closed the trunk with a soft thud, the sound echoing through the cellar, like a seal set on my own fate. The afternoon sun broke weakly through a layer of clouds, spilling pale light over the grounds of Harrow's Ridge Lodge. West Virginia's winter air clung heavy with moisture, and the silence around the property pressed in like a weight. I stood on the back porch, with my coat collar turned up, the taste of iron dampness sharp in my mouth. Koda, his limp still pronounced but his spirit undimmed, paced restlessly near the edge of the overgrown yard. His tail flicked like a pendulum, his golden eyes fixed on something I could not yet see, a familiar intensity that always meant he was onto something. "Where are you leading me now, boy?" I muttered, watching as Koda padded toward the sprawling oak tree that dominated the rear of the estate. Its limbs reached wide like weary arms, draped with moss that swayed gently in the wind. Beneath it, the earth bulged in uneven patches, tangled with roots and years of stubborn weeds. I followed, my boots sinking into the soft, rain-soaked ground. I knelt where Koda stopped, and he pawed lightly at the soil. At first, I thought it was nothing more than stone swallowed by earth. But when I brushed aside the moss and pushed away the stubborn weeds, letters revealed themselves, shallow but legible. Eliza Harrow, 1869 to 1921. The name struck me like a blow. My throat tightened, and my breath came heavy, as though the air itself had thickened, made dense by unspoken history. I traced the faint engraving with rough fingers, my mind echoing with my grandmother's whispered stories of a woman named Eliza, who had never left the house she served. This was no coincidence. I had not stumbled onto this lodge by accident. It was a return, a homecoming, written in stone long before I was born. Koda crouched beside me, head low, ears forward, watching as though he, too, understood the gravity of what we had uncovered. I rubbed the German shepherd's back absently. "She's here. She's been here all along." I cleared more brush, uncovering other markers. They leaned at odd angles, their inscriptions eroded by rain and time. Some names were nearly lost. Martha, beloved friend. Others carried only initials. LM, age 6. The stones were small, weather-worn, many sunken into the earth so far they seemed to be swallowed whole. I realized these were not the family graves of the wealthy owners. These were the resting places of those who had served, labored, and lived in shadows, their lives intertwined with Eliza's. The discovery gnawed at me. These people had been forgotten, their stories smothered by silence, their bones left unmarked by history. I pulled a rag from my pocket and began wiping one stone after another, restoring what little dignity the letters would allow. Koda sat nearby, eyes shifting from my hands to the lodge looming behind us, as though listening for sounds I could not hear, sensing the restless spirits. As twilight crept over the grounds, I straightened. My hands were raw from scraping moss and dirt, my knees damp with mud. I looked back toward Harrow's Ridge Lodge. In the fading light, its windows gaped dark and hollow, and the vines that curled around its walls seemed to shift like living things, a silent witness to the lives lived and lost here. I returned inside, my boots leaving a trail of damp earth across the hall floor. The lodge settled around me with long groans, as if acknowledging the secrets I had uncovered. I lit a lantern on the front table, the flame casting weak light across the cobwebbed chandelier. The night deepened. I lay on my bedroll in the hall, Koda curled near my feet, his breathing a steady comfort. For a time, the silence felt almost peaceful, broken only by the faint sigh of wind outside. Then it came. 3 deliberate knocks. Not random creaks or shifting boards, but measured, insistent, echoing through the east wing. I stiffened, my hand going to the flashlight and then to the rifle I kept close. Koda lifted his head, eyes glowing in the dim light, ears pricked. The dog made no move to growl or flee. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed in the direction of the sound. A silent command. The knocks came again. 3 sharp raps against wood, then silence. I rose, my boots whispering against the warped floor. I stopped at the doorway leading toward the east wing. The corridor stretched into shadow, lined with half-open doors. "Who's there?" I said, my voice low but steady, a soldier's command in a civilian world. Only the lodge answered with the groan of timbers. Koda moved forward 2 steps, then turned back to look at me, eyes bright as if urging me on. I did not advance. Something told me it was not yet time. Instead, I returned to my place near the front, sat against the wall, and listened. The lodge seemed to breathe, shifting with unseen weight. My mind replayed the words of Eliza's letter found in the basement. "The house remembers. It will guide you." Sleep came fitful, dreams tangled with whispers, faces blurred from photographs, hands reaching from the earth beneath the oak tree. The knocks resounded in my mind, 3 at a time, like a summons unanswered. By dawn, I woke with resolve. The graveyard, the trunk, the letter, the knocks, all threads of a tapestry I had only begun to unravel. The question was no longer whether the lodge was cursed. The truth was clearer now. The lodge was alive with memory, and it was calling me deeper. The morning after the 3 knocks had unsettled my dreams, I walked the length of Harrow's Ridge Lodge with lantern in hand. The light caught on the dust, casting long fingers of shadow across the walls. West Virginia's sky outside was the color of pewter, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I had not forgotten the letter hidden in the basement. They never found the room. The house remembers. It will guide you. Koda padded silently behind me, his tail low but steady, his limp less pronounced today, a testament to his healing spirit. The German shepherd had not left my side since the night before, his golden eyes flicking from doorway to doorway as though guarding me from what lurked in the silence, a silent acknowledgement of the rising stakes. The east wing drew me, the very place where the knocks had echoed. I pushed open the warped double doors of a study that had once belonged to the master of the house. The room was stripped bare, but for broken shelves and a desk half-rotten from moisture. Cracked paneling lined the walls, and a single window had been nailed shut with uneven planks. As I ran my hand along the wall, my knuckles brushed against a section of paneling. The hollow sound beneath my touch was different from the rest. I tapped again. There was a cavity behind the wood. My heart steadied into that soldier's rhythm, a calm focus settling over me. I wedged my ranger knife into the seam and pried. The boards gave way, snapping free to reveal a narrow gap. I pulled the lantern closer and crouched. Inside, hidden within the stone, was a small wooden door, its oak dark with age. Etched into its surface were initials, faint but deliberate. E.H. Eliza Harrow. I exhaled slowly, a profound sense of closure mixed with a fresh wave of purpose. "I found you," I whispered, the words echoing softly in the confined space. I pushed the door. It resisted, then yielded with a long groan, dust spilling like ash. The lantern light spilled into a space beyond, untouched by time. The hidden room was no larger than a small cellar, yet it felt almost sacred. imbued with a quiet power. A desk stood at its center, draped in cobwebs, but intact. Upon it lay a leather-bound journal, stacks of letters, and photographs, still sharp in their black and white edges. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of dried herbs, small tools, candle stubs. In the far corner, a trunk sat closed, but unlatched. Unlike the rest of the lodge, this place bore no decay. It had been sealed, too well preserved, as though waiting for me, waiting for its truth to finally emerge. I lifted the journal. The ink inside was tight, deliberate. I recognized the handwriting from the notebook found in the basement, Eliza's hand. I read aloud, in a whisper, the words resonating deep within me. If my blood should return, then let them know. This house holds our pain, but also our strength. If my descendant walks these halls, do not let them bury us again. Build something worthy. Do not let them forget us. The words burned into me like a vow, a sacred oath passed down through generations. I sat heavily on the stool by the desk, the journal trembling in my hands. For years, I had wandered without purpose, carrying scars and silence, a lone wolf in a vast wilderness. Now, here in a hidden room sealed by my ancestor, I had been handed a purpose greater than myself, a mission that resonated with every fiber of my being. Koda pressed against my leg, his head butting lightly against my knee, his golden eyes unwavering. I rested a hand on the animal's back, finding solace in his steady presence. Not a curse, I said softly, the realization a quiet thunder in my mind. A legacy. The rain began outside, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the roof like a drumbeat, a rhythmic accompaniment to this profound moment of revelation. I rose and gathered the journal and photographs, carrying them into the main hall. There, beneath the cracked chandelier, I spread them out. The faces stared back at me, men, women, children, all part of the story the town had let fade into rumor, a truth suppressed by those who wanted their legacy forgotten. That night, I worked by lantern glow. I cleared the parlor of debris, scrubbing soot from the hearth until the stone showed its true color. I nailed boards straight, swept the floors, and began the arduous task of bringing light back into darkness. And on the mantel above the fireplace, I placed the photograph of Eliza Harrow. Her eyes, sharp as flint, seemed to command the room, a silent guardian overseeing the reclamation of her truth. The next day, I turned to the graveyard. With shovel and brush, I cleared the stones, resetting those that leaned, scraping moss from names nearly lost. I erected simple wooden crosses where markers had been swallowed by earth. I planted wild flowers, their roots drinking the rain, their colors soft against the gray stone. Koda followed, lying near Eliza's stone as though keeping vigil, his presence a comforting weight, a symbol of loyalty bridging the past and present. Word traveled quickly through the quiet valleys of West Virginia. The ranger who had bought Harrow's Ridge Lodge for $100 was restoring it, not to grandeur, but to memory. At first, the curious came quietly, peering through rusted gates. Then, braver souls stepped inside. One was Deputy Sarah Miller, the local law enforcement officer who had served this district for years. Tall and broad-shouldered, her dark bronze skin weathered by mountain sun, her silver hair tied neatly back, Sarah had the bearing of a woman both respected and feared. Her uniform shirt bore a simple star. She stepped into the parlor, her expression unreadable. "You plan on staying, Alex?" she asked, her voice deep, deliberate, her eyes searching mine. I nodded. "I do." Sarah studied me for a long moment, her gaze falling upon the photographs now adorning the walls. "Then you ought to know this. Eliza Harrow wasn't just a maid. She was a force. People in these mountains don't talk about it, but my grandmother told me she organized. She kept records. She refused to be silent. If you found her things, you found the truth they tried to bury. The truth about the land, the minerals, the original owners who exploited everyone around them." She paused, her stern features softening. "I respect that you're bringing it back. We've had problems with certain corporations trying to buy up this land for cheap, trying to bury its history and its value. This was it, the connection, the corrupt power. The men who shot Koda were precisely those trying to suppress this truth." Visitors grew in number. A young history student named Ava Whitmore arrived, notebooks and camera in hand. She was in her 20s, with wheat-colored hair and freckles across her cheeks. She claimed distant ties to the Harrow family through Eliza's sister, a genealogical detail that resonated with the threads of fate I was pulling. With my cautious permission, Ava began cataloging the artifacts, digitizing documents so the legacy would not fade again. She was an unexpected ally, a beacon of intellectual curiosity joining my quest. Each evening, I sat at my table, writing in a new notebook, my own journal. On the first page I wrote, "I came here broken, but Eliza helped me remember who I was. This lodge is no curse, it is truth, and I will keep it alive." Koda remained ever near, curled before the door at night like a guardian. No longer just my loyal companion, the German shepherd had claimed his place, not just as a part of my found family, but as sentinel of the lodge's rebirth and its defense. The rain eased, leaving the mountains shrouded in a heavy mist. The calm, however, was a prelude. My satellite phone, my only lifeline to the outside world, beeped with an urgent message. Unauthorized drone activity detected near Harrow's Ridge, code Avalanche. The same signature from the men who shot Koda. They knew I had the chip. They were coming for it, and for me. Suddenly, the lodge wasn't just a place of quiet historical revelation. It was a fortress, a line drawn in the unforgiving mountain snow. I spent the next days fortifying every entrance, boarding up more windows, clearing lines of sight. Koda, his wound mostly healed, moved with a quiet intensity, his golden eyes constantly scanning the tree line, his growl a low rumble in his chest. He would be my eyes and ears, my first defense. My fear wasn't for myself. It was for the truth Eliza had entrusted to me, and for Koda, my steadfast companion. The blizzard returned with a vengeance, a blinding whiteout that enveloped the lodge, cutting us off from the world. It was a perfect storm for an assault. And then they came. The first shots ripped through the silence of the night, splintering wood near the main door. The confrontation I had braced myself for, the one I had tried to escape for so long, had finally arrived. These were not ghosts of the past, but armed men, hired by the descendants of the original oppressors, a greedy corporation determined to exploit this land and bury its history forever. They wanted the data chip, the proof of their illegal activities, and they wanted me silenced. I returned fire, the lodge shaking with the impact of each bullet. Koda, moving with incredible agility, despite his healing wound, became a whirlwind of fur and teeth, snapping at the legs of intruders who tried to breach the windows. He was magnificent, a pure force of loyalty and protection. The heavy oak door groaned under repeated blows, and the scent of gunpowder mingled with the pine and decay of the old lodge. I fought with a cold, clear focus, my training kicking in, every move precise, every shot counted. But they were many, and I was one. Suddenly, a loud crash. The eastern wall, weakened by years of neglect and the relentless assault, began to crumble. "Koda, get out!" I yelled, pushing him towards the safer western side of the lodge. The German shepherd, ever loyal, hesitated, but my command was firm. He dashed through a gap, carrying with him not just his courage, but the hidden data chip I had secured to his collar. He was the courier, the keeper of the truth. I scrambled after him, firing covering shots, the air thick with smoke and debris. We burst out into the raging blizzard, the cold, a shock to my lungs. The lodge, our sanctuary, was collapsing behind us. But Koda had done his job. He had gotten the evidence out. My mission now was to get him to safety, to ensure Eliza's truth and our future survived. Running through the snow-choked forest, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Deputy Miller. Ava must have alerted her. Hope surged, a fierce blazing warmth in the cold. We weren't alone after all. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was turning. In the aftermath, the full extent of the corporate conspiracy unfolded. The data chip Koda carried contained irrefutable evidence of illegal mining practices, land fraud, and the deliberate suppression of Eliza Harrow's legacy. Deputy Miller, with the help of Ava's meticulous historical documentation, spearheaded the investigation. The FBI was called in, and the powerful corporation, the descendants of the original owners, crumbled under the weight of their own corruption. Justice, slow but inevitable, had finally reached Harrow's Ridge. The lodge itself was extensively damaged, but not beyond repair. The local community, touched by Eliza's story and Koda's bravery, rallied around me. Deputy Miller, once skeptical, became a steadfast friend. Ava Whitmore, the history student, worked tirelessly, ensuring Eliza's journal and all the unearthed records were properly archived and shared with the public, a testament to those who had been silenced. We didn't just rebuild Harrow's Ridge, we transformed it. Koda's healing was slow but steady, a testament to his incredible spirit. I spent countless hours by his side, brushing his fur, talking to him, simply being present. Those quiet moments, the shared silences, were profoundly therapeutic. They weren't just about his physical recovery, they were about my own healing too. As I nurtured him back to health, I found myself piecing together the broken fragments of my own soul. It was in giving care that I finally learned to receive it, even from a four-legged friend. Harrow's Ridge Lodge became a sanctuary, a place I now call Shepherd's Haven. It's a refuge for canine veterans, dogs, and their handlers who, like me, are navigating the invisible scars of service, seeking solace and a purpose beyond the battlefield. The parlor, once a room of ghosts, now proudly displays Eliza's portrait and a complete history of the people who worked this land. Their stories finally etched in the annals of time. The graveyard, once neglected, blooms with wildflowers, a vibrant tribute to forgotten lives. Koda, ever the sentinel, patrols the grounds with a renewed vigor, his golden eyes no longer just watchful, but filled with a profound peace. We built a new family here, a community forged from shared purpose and a deep understanding of what it means to heal. I finally understood what Sarah had meant by a real home. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was about connection, about truth, about belonging to something larger than myself. I had come here broken, a lone wolf seeking solitude. But Eliza's legacy, Koda's courage, and the unwavering support of this community had transformed me. It turned out, this place wasn't cursed at all. It was a catalyst for justice and a beacon of healing. One evening, as lanterns flickered in the hall and the soft glow of the setting sun painted the mountains in hues of gold and purple, I stood by Eliza's portrait. I raised my hand to the glass and whispered, "They won't forget you again, not while I'm here." And for the first time in years, I felt at peace, truly home. In the end, my journey reminds us that forgotten places and forgotten people still carry voices waiting to be heard. What once seemed cursed was actually history, asking not to be erased. My choice to stay, to listen, and to rebuild shows us that healing often begins with remembrance. And in our own lives, each of us walks past silent rooms and neglected memories, family stories left untold, neighbors unnoticed, kindnesses left unspoken. If we dare to pause, to uncover, and to honor them, we may find a strength greater than ourselves. So, as you carry this story with you, ask what truth in your own life deserves to be remembered, restored, and shared. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories of hope and redemption, and join us on this journey of uncovering what truly matters.